Hello and welcome to Finextra. I'm Hannah Wallace and today I'm joined by John Mason from Thomson Reuters and we're going to be talking about MiFID II. John, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
It's a pleasure, Hannah.
So MiFID II came into force on January the 3rd. Can you give me a view of how the market is settling in and do you think there are any indicators or areas that need revisiting?
Well, I think it settled in quite well, to be honest. I think there was an expectation that the sun wouldn't rise and the sun wouldn't set, and as one of the newspapers put it, the day of the MiFID was upon us. But I think the market seemed to have coped tremendously well with MiFID II. However, there are still some things to be done. If you look at the macro level, you've got 12 EU member states that still haven't transposed MiFID II into local law. So that still needs to happen. That's preventing organisations from becoming APAs, for things like that at the moment, for example, where until that happens, those countries can't offer MiFID II compliance. At the micro level, you saw some of the announcements from BaFin, from the FCA, with regards to the 30-month transition period for Eurex and for London Metal Exchange and ICE futures, for example. So I think we've still got some of those issues to resolve. And of course, 2018 itself has a number of timelines that we were expecting anyway, in terms of reporting both for venues and investment firms under RTS 28 and 27, and then towards the latter part of the year, the SI regime, the systematic internalisation regime, kicks in, and we start to not just be able to opt in, which is what companies can do now, but actually start to determine whether an organisation is a systematic internaliser or not. So a number of things that still need to settle in over the course of this year, both at the macro and at the micro level.
Often regulation is seen as a compliance exercise, but do you think it brings opportunities as well?
Absolutely, and I mean one of the basic tenets of MiFID II was transparency, additional transparency, even particularly into the OTC market. So we alone, we've added in excess of 10.1 million instruments into our databases as a consequence of MiFID II and as a consequence of the new ISINs around OTC instruments. So an awful lot of new data in the system. I think one example I heard was in excess of 1 trillion new data points as a consequence of not just the new products, 10 million new ISINs, but something like 200 or 300 new extra data fields as well with regards to whether this is a EMEA traded product, whether it's a reportable product, threshold, large in scale, all of that information. So there's a tremendous amount of new data, new content that organisations can make use of, be they based in Europe or be they based elsewhere and just interacting with European markets. There's a tremendous opportunity in terms of the transparency that MiFID provides. And we're already beginning to see organisations, now they've got over the initial blip, if I can put it that way, of implementing MiFID II, and they're beginning to lift their heads up and say, right, now what is available? We're already beginning to see organisations come to us to consume our APA data, for example, where they're looking to make use of that data, not just rush to compliance, but now actually start to recognise what opportunities there are as a consequence of that.
And finally, 2018 has been a big year for regulation. MiFID II has certainly dominated the space, but it's not the only regulatory challenge we've seen. Do you think it's time we took a more holistic approach?
I think we've probably been there for a while, to be honest. If you look at the crossover, if regulation were a Venn diagram, there'd be an awful lot of crossover, particularly at the data level. Certain data points, at the end of the day, there's only one trade, there's only one transaction. It may be reported in different ways, it may be reported to different organisations, up through ESMA, up to the National Competent Authority and so on. But ultimately there's only one trade that took place that was the source of that reporting requirement. And so I think there's been a view within the industry that the more holistic approach to regulation that an organisation can take, the better, because there's an awful lot of repetition, be it reporting in different jurisdictions, albeit reporting the same information in different ways. You also have the new regulations coming in. So MiFID has a number of timelines itself in 2018. It's not as though it goes away. 3rd of January wasn't an end point, very much probably a beginning point as far as MiFID is concerned. But at the same time, we had PRIPS and we had EU benchmarking come in. So packaged retail and insurance and investment products information came in around funds data. So an awful lot of new data. The key information documents came in from a PRIPS perspective. EU benchmarking and the quality of the data that goes into those benchmarks all came in January 2018 as well. In May, we start worrying about GDPR, the data protection regulations from a European perspective. Globally, Monetary Authority of Singapore put out a consultation paper around best execution. So they're starting to look at MiFID-like requirements for Singapore purposes. And then we also have FRTB, which, albeit has gone back in timelines with regards to BCBS and their announcements, local institutions here in the UK, like the PRA, for example, still very much driving 2018 as a year in which they're expecting to see data from organisations to support the internal model approach. So 2018 has a number of areas, and if I look at FRTB, if I look at MiFID, if I look at some of those other areas, very common data points underpinning the analysis that's required for those regulations. So a holistic approach is very much going to serve an organisation well if they can take the time to not just be tactical and meet the regulation, but actually step back and try and look at what data structures and what data provisioning they need to meet regulation going forward.
John, this has been great. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, Hannah. Thanks for coming.
And thank you for watching.